Kandahar, 2012. Our unit was rotated into a sector that looked harmless on the maps. Farmland stitched with irrigation canals, mud brick villages half abandoned after too many seasons of war. The orders were simple: night patrols, watch the valley, report unusual movement. No one mentioned the stories that Afghan interpreters whispered only after dark. They spoke of children who walked in silence, children who weren't children. The first night, the desert seemed ordinary enough: stars bleeding across the sky, the buzz of radios, the weight of rifles at our sides. Yet silence pressed heavier than any firefight. Dogs that should have barked stayed quiet. Even the wind moved wrong. Where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it there? Because in Kandahar, the hour was measured not by clocks, but by the moment we first saw their eyes. Black, empty, a promise that nothing would be the same again. Night patrols usually fell into rhythm: boots crunching gravel, the green haze of NVGs, banter cutting tension. Davis cracked jokes about leaving the army for college. Our medic talked about buying a bar in Florida. But that night, no one laughed. Radios hissed, then snapped silent. The interpreter walked stiff, eyes scanning fields like he already knew. When we asked, he muttered a prayer instead of an answer. Thermal scans showed movement ahead, small figures drifting near a tree line. Heat signatures strange, hollow at the core. The lieutenant ordered us forward, rules of engagement demanding identification. My rifle felt heavier than ever. I told myself it was kids, maybe villagers returning late, but in the pit of my stomach I already knew. Kids weren't supposed to glow wrong on thermal, and they weren't supposed to tilt their heads in perfect unison at the sound of our approach. We called out in Pashto, the lieutenant's voice strained through comms. "Who's there? Do you need help?" No response, just figures clustering together, unnervingly still. Through NVGs, their silhouettes seemed wrong, limbs too thin, joints bending slightly off. The interpreter froze. "Don't speak to them," he whispered. "Not children." But the order pressed us forward. Boots bit into dust. One figure stepped clear, small frame, face half hidden. A girl, maybe 10. She looked up, and the valley froze with her. Her eyes weren't eyes. Black, solid, no whites, no light. Someone whispered, "Jesus." The girl's lips parted. The sound wasn't one voice but two, high and guttural, layered wrong. And then it said Davis's name. His rifle rattled, finger locked against the trigger guard. My breath fogged in air that should have been warm. Cold bled across the valley, and every man there felt it in his bones. Cold bled across the valley, and every man there felt it in his bones. Before anyone fired, they scattered. Not running, gone. One blink they stood in the field. The next, only shifting stalks swayed under the night wind. Thermals showed nothing. Radios hissed again, static sharp enough to sting the ears, then cleared as if nothing had happened. The lieutenant barked for discipline, but his voice cracked. Silence pressed down harder than gunfire. We formed perimeter, weapons up, every man waiting for shadows to reform. But nothing came. Not then. The interpreter gripped his beads until they cut his palms, whispering prayers too fast to follow. "They listen when you speak," he muttered, refusing to look at us. Davis smoked 3 cigarettes in a row when we finally pushed back to base. The lieutenant logged the patrol as uneventful. No contact, no threat. But every man carried the truth in his chest, that something had looked back at us in that valley. Inside the wire, under fluorescent lights, the story dissolved into silence. No one wanted to put words to it. Children with black eyes called our names doesn't survive in an official report. Instead, we unloaded rifles, stacked gear, and tried to believe it hadn't happened. Yet unease lingered. The interpreter slept near the gate, refusing his bunk, muttering that walls wouldn't matter. Davis scratched symbols into his helmet, claiming he didn't remember doing it. The medic kept glancing toward shadows, as if expecting to see small faces there. In the smoke pit, someone whispered, "They'll come again." No one laughed. That was the truth we didn't say aloud. Once seen, they didn't forget. The black-eyed children had marked us, and Kandahar's nights weren't ours anymore. We had entered a war no briefing had prepared us for, and the enemy wasn't holding rifles, it was waiting. The lieutenant's report listed our last patrol as uneventful. No contact, no casualties. On paper, Kandahar was quiet, but in the barracks the silence was different. Weighted, suffocating. Men sat in smoke pits whispering, voices low as if the walls themselves could overhear. Davis muttered about the girl, about her voice inside his skull. The medic swore he'd heard 2 tones layered wrong, high and guttural at once. The interpreter refused to eat, beads cutting his hands from how tightly he clutched them. Fear had soaked deeper than gunfire ever could. We were soldiers trained for ambushes, for mortars, for mines. But this was something else, something the manuals didn't cover. Every man knew it. What we'd seen in the valley wasn't finished. It had marked us. The quiet outside the wire wasn't peace anymore. It was waiting. And when night fell again, we all knew the waiting would end. Orders came down fast. Repeat the patrol, double the strength. 2 squads this time, extra comms, more thermals. The lieutenant's voice was sharp, clipped, as if command could overwrite what we'd seen by calling it interference. He told us straight, no ghosts, just another sweep. But his eyes betrayed him, darting toward the interpreter who sat apart, whispering prayers. At sunset, engines roared and dust lifted as we rolled out. Fear rode with us. The valley opened ahead, its fields too still, too silent. No dogs, no crickets. Radios carried faint static like breathing. The comms man frowned, swearing the net was clear, but every headset hissed with whispers at the edge of hearing. Names that weren't ours, syllables that didn't belong in any language we knew. Then thermals caught movement. Dozens of figures scattered near the ditch line, small, human-sized, drifting, never touching ground. They tilted their heads in unison, waiting. We advanced, rifles raised, discipline pressed tight against panic. The lieutenant barked for identification. Through NVGs, shapes sharpened, thin limbs, faces blurred by shadow, eyes that swallowed light. One figure stepped forward, a girl no taller than my chest, her head tilted back, mouth unhinged wider than any child's should. The sound that followed wasn't a scream, it was a chorus. Dozens of voices layered together, male and female, high and low, spilling from one small throat. We know you. The words weren't spoken into the air. They resonated through bone, rattled teeth, churned in marrow. Men staggered back, rifles trembling against shoulders. The interpreter dropped to his knees, chanting prayers between gasps. Even the lieutenant faltered, his voice cracking when he ordered restraint. But there was no restraint left in us. The field itself seemed alive with sound. Not wind, not static. A recognition. They had seen us once, and remembered. The first burst came from a private. 3 sharp cracks split the night. Dust erupted where rounds struck, but no bodies fell. Figures dissolved like smoke, scattering unnaturally fast. Still, the sound lingered, voices circling, humming through radios and headsets. Static bled into words, each man hearing something different. Laughter, crying, names whispered softly. Davis ripped his headset off, screaming that he could hear himself, his own voice calling. The comms man smashed his device into the dirt, sparks spitting in the dark. Panic spread in seconds. Orders meant nothing. Training dissolved. We fired into shadows, into fields, into nothing. Yet the voices grew louder. They weren't in front of us anymore. They were around us, inside us, breathing cold fog into the warm night air. The lieutenant tried to shout discipline back into us, but his voice cracked like the static itself. We weren't fighting enemies anymore. We were unraveling. We pulled back in disarray, stumbling toward the Humvees. Radios screamed until they cut to silence, like someone flicked a switch. Engines roared, headlights slicing dust. No one spoke on the ride back, not even the lieutenant. The interpreter clutched his beads until blood stained his palms. At the gate, the valley stretched silent behind us, but silence didn't mean safety anymore. It meant something waited. When we stripped gear, rifles rattled in trembling hands. Davis sat hollow-eyed, carving symbols into his helmet deeper than before. The medic refused to take his headset off, as if listening might give him control. But the interpreter finally spoke, voice low, steady as death. "They will not stop now. You've answered them." His words fell like stones in water, rippling through the barracks. We pretended to sleep, but no one closed their eyes. Because all of us knew, the black-eyed children weren't finished. Back at base, the lieutenant filed the patrol under equipment interference. No mention of the children, no mention of the voices. On paper, the night had been routine, but in the barracks, silence cut sharper than shrapnel. Men avoided each other's eyes, afraid to confirm what we'd seen. Davis smoked until his fingers shook. The interpreter muttered prayers that no one interrupted, and the medic kept cleaning gear already spotless. In the smoke pit, whispers broke loose. "Black eyes," Davis muttered, voice ragged. Another swore he'd heard two voices come from one mouth. None of us laughed. Fear had seeped too deep. The lieutenant tried to keep order with clipped commands and tightened routines, but he couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders. Official silence didn't erase what happened. It only made the truth heavier. We weren't soldiers anymore. We were marked men, waiting for the next night to fall. By dawn, rumors leaked beyond our squad. Other patrols whispered of voices in static, of silence where dogs should howl. The interpreter's warning sharpened. "They wait in the fields," he said, voice cracked but steady. Once seen, they remember. His words spread like infection. Some scoffed, desperate for denial. Most believed. The valley's silence wasn't emptiness, it was watching. Men shifted bunks closer to the wire, clinging to the hum of generators as if light alone could shield them. A private stuffed earbuds deep, blasting music to drown the quiet. Another drew crude charms into a notebook, sketches of symbols he thought might ward them off. Faith replaced doctrine. Routine collapsed. The army trains you to trust orders, to anchor yourself in discipline. But when the night itself stares back with eyes like void, order dissolves. Fear took its place, and fear was stronger than any briefing ever given. Command noticed the cracks. Punishments followed. Extra shifts. Clipped lectures about superstition. The lieutenant barked that discipline was our shield. But discipline can't mask sleepless eyes or trembling hands. Radios tested fine in daylight. Thermals read clean, yet no one trusted them. Soldiers avoided headsets after dark, fearing the whispers might return. Davis scratched at his helmet until his knuckles bled, symbols etched deep like scars in steel. The medic confessed he woke at night to laughter, thin and childlike, bleeding from silence. The interpreter grew restless, pacing the wire, muttering that names carried weight. "They choose who they follow," he said. No one mocked him now. Even the lieutenant's voice faltered when he demanded silence. We were fighting a war that had no enemy to shoot, no map to mark, no victory to chase. Only shadows, voices, and the memory of eyes that reflected nothing at all. By the second week, the valley's curse spread further. Another squad reported silence. No dogs, no crickets, followed by static in their radios. They turned back early, claiming equipment failure. Officially, it never happened, but in the smoke pit, stories piled higher. Eyes black as oil, voices calling names, children that weren't children. Every man carried a fragment, and together the fragments formed a truth command refused to see. The interpreter stopped sleeping indoors, dragging his cot to the wire, whispering that distance might save him. Some followed, shifting bunks closer to the floodlights. Others slept with rifles across their chests. Routine fractured into ritual, symbols carved into helmets, charms tied to wrists, prayers whispered where rank couldn't silence them. Kandahar had always been dangerous, but this was different. The valley had shifted from enemy territory to something older, something that didn't need rifles or IEDs to kill us, only time. The lieutenant pushed denial like doctrine, but his voice cracked with every order. Radio malfunctions, fatigue, nothing more. Yet his hands trembled when he lit cigarettes. His eyes avoided Davis, who stared hollow at walls. None of us said it aloud, but we felt it. The children had followed us back. Shadows in corners seemed to stretch too long. Radios hissed faintly, even when powered down. Men woke from sleep, swearing they heard laughter. The interpreter warned us again. Once seen, they stay. Command couldn't file that away. They could burn reports, silence rumors, but the truth was already inside the wire. We were fighting an enemy that didn't show on maps, didn't bleed when shot, and didn't leave when gates closed. And every night, the silence deepened. Not relief, not safety, waiting. Kandahar's nights belonged to them now, and they were patient enough to take us one by one. The lieutenant ordered another sweep, this time doubled strength. 2 squads, extra thermals, comms wide open. No ghosts, he said. Just complete the patrol. But his jaw was tight, and his hands twitched when he lit his cigarette. At sundown, we rolled out, engines heavy in the dust. The interpreter begged us not to go. "Every time you call, they come closer," he warned, eyes wide. But orders outweighed prayers. The valley opened ahead, still as a grave. Dogs absent, crickets gone, the same hollow silence pressing from all sides. Radios hissed faintly, not chatter, not static, but breathing. The comms man swore the net was clear. Still, we all heard it. Low whispers brushing through the headsets, syllables that didn't belong to any tongue we knew. The interpreter clutched his beads, whispering into clenched teeth. We marched anyway. Because in Kandahar, refusal wasn't an option, but none of us wanted to return. The valley was quieter than before. Too quiet. Thermals picked up figures scattered along the ditch line, dozens of them. Small shapes drifting in slow rhythm, their heads tilting together like marionettes. They didn't move like children. They didn't move like anything we knew. The lieutenant's voice cracked through comms, demanding identification. But even he sounded uncertain. Through NVGs, faces blurred by shadow, limbs too thin, torsos hollow at the core. A girl stepped forward, smaller than my chest. Her mouth opened wide, wider than it should, and the sound that came wasn't hers alone. A chorus poured out, layered voices, men, women, guttural, shrill, perfect English. "We know you." The words didn't travel on air. They rattled through ribs, bent bone, pressed against marrow. Some men staggered, rifles shaking. The interpreter dropped to his knees, muttering prayers faster than breath. Discipline cracked. Orders faltered. And in that moment, we all knew this wasn't a patrol, it was a summons. The first shot came from a private. Bursts tore into the fields, dust rising where bullets struck. Nothing fell. Figures dissolved like mist, scattering faster than eyes could track. Still, the voices remained, circling. Radios erupted, each headset spilling different sounds, crying, laughter, whispered names. Davis screamed, ripping his off, shouting that his own voice was calling him. The comms man smashed his gear against the ground until sparks spit. Panic spread in seconds, faster than orders could contain it. We fired into the dark, into silence, into nothing. But the whispers pressed closer. Cold rolled across the valley, breath fogging in warm night air. The lieutenant shouted, but his voice cracked. The interpreter wailed prayers. Rifles trembled in hands trained to stay steady. We weren't fighting insurgents. We weren't fighting enemies at all. We were unraveling in the dark, every man marked by voices that knew us by name. Pullback was chaos. Orders dissolved into stumbling retreat. Engines roared as we climbed into Humvees, headlights slicing dust. Radios screamed static, then cut out in unison, silence dropping like a hammer. The chorus lingered, high, layered, impossible, until the valley fell still behind us. No pursuit, no shots fired, just absence. But silence wasn't safety anymore. It was a reminder. At the gate, Davis sat hollow-eyed, fingers scratching grooves into his helmet deeper than before. The interpreter's beads broke in his grip, blood on his palms. No one spoke. Even the lieutenant's voice failed him. Fear clung to us, heavier than our gear, sinking into skin. Kandahar's knights had claimed us, and we knew it. Retreat wasn't escape. The valley hadn't stayed behind. It had followed us back, riding in the silence, whispering through the dark. Back inside, discipline shattered. Soldiers whispered like children in a storm. Stories stacked, eyes black as void, voices speaking in two tongues, laughter spilling from radios. The lieutenant filed reports stripped of detail, interference, fatigue, nothing unusual. But even he avoided Davis's hollow stare. The interpreter sat with his back to the wall, whispering, "They will not stop now. You've answered them." His words landed heavier than bullets. Men avoided radios after dark, stuffing earbuds with music, smashing gear in secret. Faith replaced orders. Ritual replaced procedure. Kandahar wasn't ours anymore. The war outside the wire had shifted, dragging us into something older, colder, patient. And when the valley called again, none of us doubted we'd hear our names, not from insurgents, not from command, from children with eyes black as endless night. And once they remembered you, there was no leaving their war behind. Back at base, the lieutenant filed the report clean. Radio interference. Fatigue. No threat detected. On paper, nothing had happened. But in the barracks, silence turned heavier than sandbags. Soldiers hunched close, voices low, trading fragments like contraband. Davis whispered of eyes black as oil, like voids looking back. The medic swore he'd heard a chorus in one child's mouth, two voices layered wrong. No one laughed. Fear spread in whispers sharper than bullets. The interpreter finally broke his silence. "They are not children," he warned. "They wear faces to draw you closer. Once you answer, they follow." His words cracked, but no man mocked him. In the smoke pit, glowing embers lit hollow stairs. The desert war outside was easier. Rifles, mines, enemies you could name. What stalked us now was older, colder, and it knew us. Not by rank, not by uniform, by name, and that truth settled in. We pressed him, needing answers. He hesitated, muttering that even speaking of them gave them strength. But prayers slipped into stories. Stories into warnings. My grandfather called them jinn, he whispered. Children of shadows. If you follow, they take you. If you call, they hear. Once seen, they remember. His eyes flicked to Davis, who rocked in silence, carving grooves deeper into his helmet. The medic clutched his canteen as if water could wash fear away. Some scoffed, clinging to denial, but most believed, not because we trusted folklore, but because denial no longer fit the facts. Dogs that didn't bark, radios whispering names, breath fogging in warm air. Kandahar's nights were marked. The lieutenant tried to reassert discipline, calling it fatigue, imagination, but his voice faltered. His hands trembled, lighting another cigarette. Faith replaced orders. Rituals replaced drills. We were soldiers standing watch in a war that felt older than time. Command caught whispers. Meetings behind closed doors. Raised voices muffled by canvas walls. Punishments followed. Extra guard shifts. Stripped privileges. Sharpened orders. But discipline doesn't erase fear. Radios tested clear in daylight. Thermals read clean. Yet men smashed headsets at night, refusing to listen. A private faked illness to avoid patrol. Another wandered the perimeter in a trance, muttering names no one else recognized. He swore voices had coaxed him from sleep. Kind voices, familiar, inviting. That was worse than threats. Kindness felt sharper in the dark. The interpreter said it plain. They are not hostile. They are hungry. They borrow what you love to make you follow. His words cut deeper than warnings. For the first time, we realized this wasn't random. It was deliberate. They chose who they spoke to, who they wanted, and we couldn't tell who would be called next, only that someone would. The lieutenant forced rationality like armor. We're soldiers, not children afraid of fairy tales. You will carry out orders. His tone was clipped, but his eyes avoided Davis, who stared blank into walls. That night, radios hissed louder, not on patrol but in the barracks. Static-filled headsets left on bunks, whispering names in layered tones. Davis tore his apart with bare hands, screaming they were whispering again. The interpreter bolted, clutching beads so tight they drew blood. No punishment could patch it. We were unraveling. Fear hollowed discipline. Men stuffed symbols into helmets, crosses on chains, cloth charms tied to wrists. Kandahar's war had shifted. Not bullets, not mortars, voices, shadows, black eyes that remembered us. And the truth no briefing could erase. Once seen, they would not forget. We had answered, and answering had invited them inside. Orders couldn't keep them out. No wall, no wire, no rank. By then, every man knew this wasn't ending. The valley had marked us. Silence no longer meant peace, it meant waiting. The interpreter refused to leave his cot after sundown, whispering prayers into cracked lips. Davis woke screaming, laughter ringing outside his window. The medic admitted he drank water at night, only to drown the sound of whispers. Still, command doubled patrols, barking orders sharper, harsher, as though volume could replace truth. But soldiers knew better. We weren't fighting insurgents. We weren't fighting an enemy at all. We were fighting something that wore the shape of children, something patient enough to wait at the edge of the lights, something that answered when you called. The interpreter said it once more. Once you see them, they never forget. His words fell into silence like stones into a well, deep and endless. And every man knew he wasn't warning us anymore. He was marking the inevitable. It began small, easy to dismiss. Footsteps crunching gravel when guards swore no one was there. Flashlights flickered on and off in supply tents. Batteries tested full. Radios powered down still hissed faintly. Static like slow breathing. Command called it fatigue, long shifts, bad gear. But the men knew better. Fear sharpened hearing, made every sound matter. Dogs chained near the gate went wild one night, hackles high, teeth snapping at empty air. Their eyes locked on darkness beyond the wire, snarling at what we couldn't see. The interpreter refused to go near them. They're already here, he whispered, voice like stone. His hands shook, beads rattling between bloody fingers. We stood watch with rifles pressed tight, but the truth sat heavy in our chests. Fences and gates were nothing. Lights hummed, but shadows pressed closer. Whatever haunted the valley had stepped closer to the wire, patient and waiting. 2 nights later, Davis vanished. His bunk lay empty at dawn, rifle untouched, boots still at his cot. Panic tore through the barracks. Search teams swept the perimeter, shouting his name until throats bled. Hours later, he returned through the gate, stiff uniform caked in dust. His eyes were unfocused, hollow. The medic rushed forward, but Davis only whispered, "She called me." His lips trembled. The little girl, she knew my name. He refused to explain. That evening he sat rocking in silence, scratching deeper symbols into his helmet until steel bent under his nails. The interpreter stared, pale as ash. "They borrow faces," he said softly. "They remember who answers." No one laughed. Even the lieutenant couldn't force a joke. We all watched Davis, silent, broken, and knew the truth we wouldn't speak. He hadn't returned alone. Something of the valley walked with him now, inside him. After Davis's return, the interpreter demanded to see command. His words shook, but his conviction didn't. "Bullets won't matter. They are Gene, old ones. You've invited them by answering." The lieutenant dismissed him as superstitious, but his eyes betrayed doubt. Even he avoided Davis's empty stare. The hollow man who sat among us like a shell. Men started wearing charms, crosses on chains, cloth strips tied to wrists, symbols scratched onto rifles. Orders no longer held us together. Rituals did. The medic whispered that Davis talked in his sleep, his mouth moving in two voices at once. Others swore they heard children's laughter echoing between tents, though no one was there. The interpreter warned again, louder this time. Once they are inside, they do not leave. He wasn't begging anymore. He was stating fact, and the barracks carried the weight of it. We weren't keeping them out. They were already here. That week, guards reported figures along the perimeter fence. Small shapes walking in unison, heads tilted toward the floodlights. They never crossed the boundary, never ran. They simply stood, eyes reflecting nothing, watching. Spotlights swept fields, but the children dissolved into shadow, only to reappear minutes later. Each guard heard something different in his headset, his own name whispered or a voice from childhood coaxing him closer. By dawn, half the men refused to stand post alone. Command barked orders, but fear gnawed deeper than rank. The lieutenant's face turned gaunt, his orders sharper, brittle as glass. The interpreter refused posts altogether. "They don't need walls," he said. "They wait, and they remember." His voice carried the weight of certainty, not warning. The wire had become a line in sand, meaningless. Beyond it, silence waited with eyes black as coal, patient enough to wear us down one shift at a time. Discipline collapsed. Sleep vanished. Men sat wide-eyed through the night. Rifles clutched like lifelines. Radios were smashed in secret, headsets buried. Davis finally broke, screaming in the dark that the children were inside, clawing at his skull. The medic sedated him, but his cries echoed long after. The interpreter sat pressed against the wall, whispering prayers through bloodied lips, eyes fixed on corners where shadows bent wrong. "They don't need doors," he muttered. "They're already here." His words rang truer than any order, and the barracks felt smaller, darker, more suffocating each night. We weren't watching fields anymore. We were watching shadows inside our own walls. Fear wasn't discipline lost. Fear was truth. The black-eyed children had crossed the wire. They didn't need gates or fences. They needed only names, and we had given them ours. Once inside, they stayed, and the war we thought we understood was over. The first true breach came on a midnight watch. A private on the South Tower radioed movement, then silence. When relief arrived an hour later, his post was empty. Rifle on the floor, round chambered, safety off. No struggle, no prints, just absence. Floodlights cut across barren fields, but nothing moved. Then it came, a child's voice, high and clear, drifting from beyond the wire. "He's with us now." Radios erupted in static, layered with laughter not belonging to any man. The commander ordered everyone inside, gates locked, guards doubled, but doors and fences meant nothing anymore. We huddled in silence, rifles across our knees, waiting. Some prayed, some stared blank into shadows. No one asked where the missing private had gone. Deep down, we all knew. He hadn't left the wire. He'd been taken through it, as if boundaries no longer applied, and the voice had promised he wasn't coming back. That same night, men woke screaming. They swore children stood at the ends of their bunks, eyes black as oil, watching in silence. One soldier gasped that cold hands pressed against his chest, stealing his breath. Another whispered he'd heard his mother's voice, her childhood nickname for him, coaxing him into the dark. The medic rushed to calm them, but no intruders were found. Bedsheets were soaked with sweat, rifles clutched so hard they shook. The interpreter only muttered, "Once inside, they stay." His words weren't warning anymore. They were truth. Fear rotted us from within. We weren't just haunted in fields. They had crossed into our barracks, our dreams, our breath. Men refused to close their eyes, whispering through the night, voices cracking. Every shadow in the corner felt alive, every creak of canvas a step closer. It was no longer outside versus inside, it was already here. Command tried to contain panic with routine. Floodlights burned all night, generators humming until fuel ran low. Patrols doubled, curfews enforced, but the children slipped through anyway. Men swore they saw faces in flashlight beams, eyes hollow, vanishing before anyone else could confirm. Davis, once restless, now sat silent, rocking slow, his eyes empty. He didn't blink, he didn't respond when spoken to. The medic demanded he be evacuated. The lieutenant refused, muttering, "We can't explain this." So Davis stayed, an empty shell among us, a constant reminder of what waited in the valley. The interpreter avoided him, muttering prayers through clenched teeth. Fear thickened until barracks air tasted metallic. Sleep meant surrender. Wakefulness meant staring into corners that didn't stay empty. We weren't just soldiers anymore, we were hosts to something we didn't understand. And command's silence told us the truth. This wasn't a war we could win. By the third week, the unit broke. Radios were destroyed, headsets shattered, pieces buried in dirt, as if silence could protect us. Ammunition checks failed because rounds were fired into shadows, into corners no one else saw. One guard swore a child walked through the perimeter fence without disturbing wire. Another collapsed mid-watch, pulse racing, babbling that children clawed from under the ground. Panic wasn't rare anymore. It was routine. Orders carried no weight. Men clung to scraps of ritual, crosses on chains, charms scratched into steel, prayers whispered under breath. Kandahar wasn't a battlefield now. It was a hunting ground, and we weren't soldiers. We were prey. The lieutenant barked louder, but his voice cracked easier. His eyes sank deeper. No one needed to say it aloud. Discipline was dead. The war wasn't against insurgents anymore. It was against shadows, children who never grew old, and eyes that never blinked. The storm finished what fear had started. Winds tore through the valley, rattling tents, driving dust like needles into our skin. Amid the roar came laughter, high, layered, childlike. It carried in every gust, louder than engines, louder than shouting. Men huddled together in corners, rifles clutched like talismans. Some prayed, others wept. Davis vanished again, unnoticed until dawn, when only his helmet was found by the wire. Symbols carved deep into the steel bent it inward, grooves etched like wounds. The interpreter sat broken, beads snapped, lips moving soundlessly. He refused food, refused orders, refused words. Silence settled heavier than the storm itself. And we all knew what command wouldn't admit. We weren't leaving Kandahar untouched. The valley had breached the wire. The children had crossed the gates. The base wasn't ours anymore. It belonged to them, and they were patient enough to finish the war in silence. Rotation orders dropped without warning. Our unit was reassigned, pulled from Kandahar like chess pieces moved off a board. Officially, it was routine. Resources shifted, strategy adjusted. Unofficially, we knew better. Too many breakdowns, too many whispers bleeding past the wire. Davis was marked missing in action, though every man had seen his helmet at the fence, symbols carved deep as wounds. His name vanished from logs as if he had never lived. The lieutenant burned reports, pages curling into ash that never made it to archives. The interpreter refused to board the convoy. He shook his head, muttering, "Leaving won't matter. They remember faces." His words weren't warning, they were fact. As engines started, silence pressed against our ears heavier than gunfire. Kandahar didn't end at the wire. It came with us, carried in our breath, in our bones. Withdrawal was not escape, it was only distance. Back in the States, silence became doctrine. No one spoke of Kandahar beyond rehearsed lines, routine patrols, nothing unusual. Those words filled paperwork, debriefings, brief exchanges with curious families. But nights betrayed us. Men woke in sweat, swearing they saw children at their doorways, eyes black as oil. Radios hissed faintly though powered down, static bleeding like slow breath. Davis's name was never spoken aloud, but his absence lingered heavier than bodies. The interpreter stayed behind, his words etched into memory. They remember faces. We carried that sentence home like infection. In bars, in kitchens, in late-night phone calls, silence filled the gaps where truth should have lived. Fear wasn't left in Afghanistan. It crossed oceans with us, stitched into memory. Official silence was easy. Personal silence was impossible. Because at night, when the house grew still, you could almost hear laughter, faint and layered, pressing against your own name. The lieutenant unraveled fastest. He lived in paperwork, chain-smoking until his hands shook. He barked orders at nobody, clipped phrases meant to sound like control. His neighbors whispered he never slept. Lights burning all night, curtains drawn. Others broke quieter. The medic drank himself hollow. One private was found wandering highways, muttering about children walking after dark. Another locked himself in a basement, radio smashed, ears stuffed with wax. None of us returned whole. We'd fought in valleys where bullets mattered, where insurgents bled and died. But Kandahar had given us an enemy that didn't play by war's rules. It didn't need rifles, mortars, or maps. It only needed our names. And once we'd given them, the war had followed us home. Families noticed. Friends noticed. They asked questions we never answered, because words gave it power. And silence. Silence was the only shield we thought we had left. Rumors spread through the community anyway. Whispers of black-eyed children at base gates, of soldiers lost without records, of reports burned before reaching archives. Veterans leaned closer in bars, voices hushed. Some nodded knowingly, swearing they'd seen the same in Helmand or Coast. Figures in orchards, voices in static, dogs that refused to bark. Others laughed nervously, trying to brush it aside. But the pattern formed, undeniable. This wasn't one valley, one unit, one cursed patrol. It was older, wider, something that haunted deserts and villages long before we marched there. The interpreter's warning gained weight. They borrow faces to draw you closer. Once you answer, they follow. We carried that sentence like scripture, though it offered no salvation, only truth. The army had buried Kandahar under silence, but silence didn't erase the war we brought home. It only made the laughter in the night harder to explain away. Years later, some men still vanish. Not on patrols, not on deployments, at home. A neighbor swears he saw a soldier's child walking into the woods at dusk, but when search teams came, no footprints remained. Another veteran drove into the desert, never returning, his car found with the engine running and doors wide open. Files label them missing, families label them broken. But those who were there, those who remember the valley, we don't ask where they went. We already know. The children don't forget. Once seen, they stay. And when the silence grows too heavy, when radios hiss in powered-down rooms, when you hear your name whispered by a voice that isn't yours, you understand. Withdrawal wasn't escape, it was delay. The war never ended, it only changed its battlefield, and the enemy never grew old. It stayed waiting, black-eyed, patient enough to finish what it had started. Civilian life was supposed to feel safe. Streets lined with mailboxes, the hum of air conditioners, children playing in yards. But for us, the war never left. One man swore he saw a girl outside his house at dusk, eyes black as night. She didn't move until he called his son's name, and then she was gone. Another veteran found his radio hissing, even unplugged, faint whispers brushing through static. Families noticed. Wives asked why we woke in sweat, why we stared at corners of empty rooms. We never answered, because speaking their name gave them strength. Silence felt like the only shield left, but silence offered no sleep. We carried Kandahar home in our bones, and every creak of the house at night felt like footsteps, every gust of wind, layered laughter. The war had shifted its battlefield. Not valleys, not villages. Now it lived in our homes. The medic was the first to fracture openly. He drowned fear in bottles, but drink couldn't quiet the voices. He swore he heard laughter outside his window, thin and childlike. Neighbors found him sitting on the porch at dawn, staring at the yard as if expecting someone to step out of shadows. Another soldier, back in Texas, locked his basement tight. Radios smashed, walls covered with symbols scrawled in charcoal. His family said he stuffed cotton into his ears at night, muttering, "They whisper names." No doctor's note could explain it, no diagnosis could erase it. The children didn't stay in Kandahar. They followed. Their black eyes showed up in dreams, in reflections, in the static hum of televisions at 3 a.m. We stopped calling them hallucinations. They weren't gone. They were waiting, and every one of us who had answered them once carried their attention forever. Davis's name remained absent from records, burned away with the reports. But some swore they saw him after discharge, sitting at the edge of a bar, helmet symbols carved into his arms now, rocking in silence. Others said they spotted him walking highways at night, children in tow, no footsteps left behind. None of it confirmed. But rumors don't need proof when fear makes them real. The interpreter's warning rang louder. Once seen, they remember. Families began whispering too. Wives woke to find their husbands speaking in two voices at once. Children cried about strangers at their windows, small faces watching without blinking. The black-eyed children weren't bound by valleys or deserts. They wore faces to fit any place, any time. And when they called with voices you trusted. A parent, a sibling, a lover. They didn't need to scare you. They only needed you to listen. Support groups formed in secret. Not official VA meetings. Those demanded reports, explanations, paperwork. These were circles in basements, in garages, men sitting shoulder to shoulder with silence heavier than confession. Cigarettes glowed, bottles passed, eyes downcast. One man said he woke to find a girl standing in his hallway, her voice layered wrong, calling him brother. Another swore his radio alarm clock spoke in his own voice, telling him to open the door. No one laughed. No one questioned. The interpreter's words became scripture. They don't need doors. They are already with you. We spoke in fragments, never whole stories, because whole stories gave them shape, and every man there believed that even speaking in whispers might be enough to summon them. Silence wasn't safety anymore. It was just delay. And delay was all we had, waiting for the black-eyed children to remember our names again. Civilian life kept moving. Families, jobs, schools. But for us, nights were war zones. Some veterans vanished quietly. One walked into the desert, car left running, doors open. Another drowned in his own bathtub, wife swearing she heard laughter moments before. Files labeled them lost, broken, unstable. But we knew better. They hadn't left. They'd been taken back. Because once you answer the children, you can't escape. The interpreter had told us, and every crack in our lives confirmed it. The black-eyed children didn't need Kandahar anymore. They carried us in their memory, and we carried them in ours. That was the bond, unbreakable, suffocating. The war had ended for the army, but not for us. For us, the battlefield was every shadowed hallway, every hiss of static, every child's laughter cutting wrong, and the enemy never aged. It stayed waiting, black-eyed, patient enough to claim the rest of us in time. Testimonies leaked in fragments. Years after Kandahar, a soldier muttered in a hospital ward that children stood at his bed each night, their eyes swallowing light. Another wrote letters no one was meant to read, words that ended with, "If this reaches you, I am already gone." Families found journals hidden in closets, pages filled with black circles where eyes should be. None of it reached archives. Official silence was absolute, but in quiet corners among veterans who couldn't sleep, the truth was told. They never left. One whispered, "They don't grow old. They wait." The interpreter's warning rang across years. Once seen, they remember. We understood it too well. The black-eyed children weren't confined to Kandahar. They weren't even confined to memory. They moved with us, breathing through static, peering through shadows. The war hadn't ended. It had simply gone quiet, waiting for us to speak again. Civilians call it trauma, PTSD, the residue of battle. But war has familiar shapes: explosions, fire, blood. This was different. This was silence growing heavier, shadows bending wrong, radios hissing when unplugged. Families didn't see the difference. They only saw us unravel. One wife said her husband woke nightly, standing at the window, whispering back to something outside. Another swore her son's voice echoed through the baby monitor, though he lay silent in bed. Doctors called it stress. We called it what it was: recognition. They had followed us home, and in every whisper, every child's laugh too sharp in the dark, we heard the truth. The black-eyed children weren't haunting Afghanistan. They were haunting us. They didn't need valleys or villages. They needed our names, and we had given them freely too many times. That bond didn't break. It only deepened like roots growing unseen beneath the ground. We learned to live in silence. Radios destroyed, televisions unplugged, headphones worn at night, blasting static to drown whispers that weren't supposed to exist. Yet even silence betrayed us, because silence was their ground. In silence, they spoke. In silence, they came closer. Some soldiers tried rituals, crosses around necks, charms etched into door frames, salt poured across thresholds. But rituals faltered. One veteran swore he woke to find a child standing in his kitchen, smiling with eyes black as oil. Another said his dead brother's voice called him from the woods at night. They borrowed faces, borrowed tones, borrowed love. And in that borrowing, they stole sleep, stole sanity. We stopped sharing these stories with outsiders, not because we feared ridicule, but because words made them stronger. And every time we spoke of them, the static returned louder. Silence was no longer safety. It was surrender, and we were already surrounded. Time stretched, men aged. But the children never did. They lingered in the edges of sight, unchanging. 10 years, 20, it made no difference. Their eyes stayed black, their laughter layered, their patience endless. A retired sergeant swore he saw the same girl who called Davis's name decades ago, standing outside a gas station at midnight. Another veteran swore he heard his own voice on the radio in his truck, whispering directions into nowhere. They weren't bound by place or time. They were bound by memory, by recognition. Once you answered, they owned a part of you. No war ended that. No discharge erased it. The black-eyed children carried no rifles, no banners, no flags, but they carried permanence, and that permanence was worse than war itself. War ends, battles fade, but this was endless, patient, and the silence it carried was deeper than any grave we'd ever dug. Final testimonies always end the same way, with silence. Pages left blank, tapes cut short, letters burned before completion. Not because men had nothing left to say, but because they realized words only invited the voices back. Silence was the only weapon left, and even that felt fragile. Veterans who survived Kandahar learned not to speak names after dark, not to answer voices that sounded familiar, not to trust laughter in the night. We live scattered now, in cities, in suburbs, in deserts far from Afghanistan. But distance is meaningless, because when the world grows quiet, when static hums through empty rooms, when your own name echoes faintly where it shouldn't, you understand. The black-eyed children are still here. They never left. They never aged. They never forgot. And one day when silence grows too heavy, they will speak again. And this time, they won't wait for an answer.